Hello, and welcome to another episode of Monster Monday from the Ready to Die channel. Using the rules for making monsters in Pathfinder Second Edition, I build stat blocks of creatures for my own games and to share with the community. I also operate a blog where these stat blocks can be found, alongside a Pathfinder First Edition and D&D 5e version, which is linked below along with the Monster Monday Twitter and Discord. This week, we explore another creature from a monster hunting game, and one that I've actually faced before, though not for quite some time at this point. This week's beastie is a blazing, burning behemoth from Dauntless, the Charrogg. This monster is an early mid-level creature in its home game, spanning levels 5 through 8. I veered a little towards the lower end of that range with a level 6, in part because I want to fill out those levels of my own bestiary. Given its description as a walking volcanic eruption, I felt like the Charrogg was deserving of the fire trait, but I was briefly torn on making it an animal, like many of its kin. I knew that I wanted the Charrogg to have an innate spell, and the only animal that I could find with any innate spells was a single unique creature from an AP that was also a mutant. This creature felt more like an exception than a guideline, and armed with this knowledge, I settled on using the beast trait for this violent volcanic vandal. The Charrogg is reminiscent of a turtle, or maybe an ankylosaurus in its design. Similar to my thinking for the Odibatarasu, I sought to play into it, being this oblivious creature that simply barrels through obstacles, leading into the use of a low perception score for its level. Built sturdy and low to the ground, a high strength and constitution seemed appropriate for the Charrogg. However, it's not exactly nimble, and is going to use a lower dexterity to match that. I already explained my reasoning behind building the Charrogg as a beast, which means that the lowest its intelligence can be is a -3, with that being one of the defining features of the beast trait. Defensively, Charrogg makes use of a moderate armor class that is balanced out by a high pool of hit points. It isn't agile, it isn't dodging out of the way of the attacks, but it is able to tank them pretty well. I mentioned that the Charrogg is a terrapin type creature, which led to some similarities between it and the Odibatarasu. For example, the Charrogg also uses a high fortitude save, matching its similarly high constitution, while on the other hand, it is lacking both dexterity and wisdom, which will result in us using the low values for its remaining 2 saves. In Dauntless, the Charrogg is a blaze behemoth, associating it with fire and giving it immunity to that element. However, this element attunement also leads it to having a weakness to cold damage, which gets factored into the build. In approaching the design of the Charrogg, I didn't use any of the pre-existing roadmaps and instead thought of the Charrogg as a magical bruiser. It weathers the assaults of its enemies as it launches its abilities at them rather than seeking to overwhelm them with a bevy of brutal blows. To this end, its Jaws and Tail Strike use a low attack bonus for its level, and respectively deal moderate and low damage. I wanted to give the Tail Strike the lower damage, since it has the sweep trait and greater reach than all of its other attacks, but I worry I may have overshot tuning it. If you're using the Charrogg and its tail doesn't feel like it's landing hard enough, feel free to bump up that damage a bit. Its Claw Strike has a moderate bonus with low damage, mainly to facilitate another ability in its arsenal. Moving on to these abilities, I want to start with the reason behind making it a beast, its Flaming Sphere. It gains this as an at-will primal innate spell because I think it is a fairly safe spell to have in that position. The damage of the spell isn't too crazy and can be completely negated on a success instead of just having it. Design-wise, this spell is intended to represent the ball of magma that the Charrogg spits out and then homes in on a foe. It felt like a pretty easy fit for it to me. As I said previously, the Charrogg is built as a magical bruiser, so I'm using the high DC for its level for this spell and its remaining abilities. The Charrogg has a nifty little attack in Dauntless, where it will scoop up flaming earth in its tail and then launch this molten mass at a creature like a catapult. The dirt turned lava it launches spreads across the ground for a short period, dealing further damage. To capture this concept, I built its Fling Flames ability. Its initial damage targets only a single creature, but I still reference the area damage table. With 4d8 fire damage having an average of 18, it sits in between the limited and unlimited use damage averages to account for the hazardous terrain that it creates. The Charrogg's main claim to flame are the fire sacs located above each of its limbs that allow it to blast out lines of fire. Doing so causes it to lift slightly from the ground, and it then tends to slowly turn in a circle to catch everybody in the blast. I considered having this work as an aura that the Charrogg could activate or deactivate, but it felt off doing it that way. Instead, it has a pseudo-aura in the form of fire jets, being a 2-action ability that creates an emanation of fire around it for a full round. When I decided to design it this way, my initial plan had been to have it be a one-and-done emanation that simply dealt its damage when first activated. But the Charrogg does maintain these flames for a bit, damaging enemies who enter the area, and so I added that duration to it. Despite this functioning like an aura, this uses a high DC once again, since it has to spend 2 actions to activate it every turn to make use of it. The Charrogg's final active ability is pretty simple and is based off of a series of slams that the Charrogg performs that knocks enemies back and down. To replicate that, it can use Thrashing Tantrum as a single action to make 2 claw strikes and gain improved knockdown on both of these strikes, allowing it to knock enemy prone as part of that action. Both of these strikes use the normal multiple attack penalty, which is why I gave the claw strikes that higher attack bonus. However, I still didn't want the Charrogg to spam this too much, especially once he has foes on the ground, so I added the Flourish trait. The final ability to discuss for the Charrogg is its reaction, Channel Flames. This isn't really based off of any specific ability, but in my research on the Charrogg, I noticed sometimes it would make strikes with fire licking from its tail after using it to fling that magma. I thought that was a neat idea, and I wanted to incorporate it further into the creature with this reaction, triggered by using any of its fire-based abilities. The extra damage it adds isn't much, but it is enough to bump up the average damage of its strikes by 1 step. So the low damage of its tails and claws becomes moderate, and the moderate damage of its jaws becomes high with this extra d6 of fire damage. Initially, I didn't have an idea for gear based off of the Charrogg, but then I discovered it had a few unique items in Dauntless, a blaze hammer called the Molten Edict, and a helm called the Skull Forge. I left it up to my lovely test subjects as to which they would rather see, and they suggested the Molten Edict. Mostly because of the name, which, I understand. Before I could dig into the design for this weapon, I knew that I wanted it to have the Flaming Rune, which is a level 8 item. It would be weird to put this on a level 6 or lower weapon, so I had to make it a level 9, which separates it a bit from the Charrogg. Most Charrogg weapons in Dauntless periodically unleash cones of flame, but this hammer replaces regular blasts with fireballs. Translating that into Pathfinder felt a little unexciting design-wise, so instead, I decided to play into the shove trait popular among hammers. The special ability of the Molten Edict, in my design, extends the distance that you shove creatures while also turning them into a bomb, letting you bat the baddies back into their buddies, which felt more fun and unique to me. And with that, we've come to the end of our dive into the Charrogg. Built as a tanky sort of magical bruiser, this ferocious felon forces foes to face its fearsome flames. Its area damage and survivability requires the heroes to exploit its vulnerabilities to take it down, and will likely force them to stay on the move. The suggestion that came up during the test for it was having the Charrogg take up a perch on a high spot and just rain down flaming spears upon foes, or even have a group of them doing so. Which, even by my standards, is kinda mean. You can check out the Monster Monday blog and Twitter for the stat blocks, or hop on the Discord to join the monster making and general tabletop discussions. These posts also include a Pathfinder First Edition version of the monster, along with a D&D 5e conversion. Thanks for watching, and have a monstrous Monday.